The telegram arrived on the worst day of Mara Holloway's life, the day her own sister called her too fat to love at Sunday dinner. 26 years old, invisible to every man in Boston except the ones who laughed, Mara did something reckless. She answered a Wyoming rancher's advertisement for a wife. She expected silence. She got a train ticket instead. Now she's standing on a windswept platform facing Dane Mercer, a man carved from stone and sorrow, who looks at her like she's the last mistake in a long line of them. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Mara's journey reaches. The Holloway dining room smelled like roasted chicken and shame. Mara sat at the far end of the table, fork frozen halfway to her mouth, while her sister Caroline's words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. The family had gone quiet. Her mother's hand trembled on her water glass. Her father cleared his throat but said nothing, and Caroline just smiled that pretty poisonous smile she'd perfected since childhood. "I'm only saying what everyone thinks," Caroline continued, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "Mara's 26 years old, no prospects, and honestly, Mother, you can't expect any decent man to—" "That's enough." Mara's voice came out steadier than she felt. She set down her fork with deliberate care, though her hands wanted to shake. "I'll take my dinner upstairs." "See? She can't even face the truth." Caroline turned to their mother with exaggerated sympathy. "It's cruel to let her keep hoping. Someone should tell her that maybe she's simply not meant for marriage. Not every woman is." Mara stood. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like a scream. 26 years of swallowed insults, sideways glances, whispered comments behind gloved hands, it all crystallized in that moment into something sharp and unbreakable in her chest. "You're right, Caroline." Mara met her sister's eyes. "Not every woman is meant for your kind of marriage. The kind where you trade your brain for a pretty face and hope your husband doesn't notice when the face starts to fade." Her mother gasped. Her father finally looked up from his plate. Mara didn't wait for their response. She walked out of that dining room with her spine straight and her head high. Even though her vision blurred with tears, she refused to let fall until she reached her bedroom. She locked the door and stood in the center of the small room that had been her entire world for too long. The mirror on the dresser showed her what everyone else saw: a woman too broad in the shoulders, too thick in the waist, too much of everything except the one thing that seemed to matter. She'd stopped looking at herself years ago, stopped hoping that maybe one morning she'd wake up transformed into something delicate and desirable. The advertisement was tucked in the bottom drawer of her dresser, hidden beneath winter stockings and embroidered handkerchiefs she'd made herself because no one else would make them for her. She'd cut it from the newspaper 3 weeks ago as a joke, a bitter, private joke about the kind of desperation it would take to answer such a thing. Wyoming rancher seeks wife. Must be strong, practical, and willing to work. Remote location. Difficult conditions. No expectations of romance. Write to Dane Mercer, Windscar Ridge Ranch, Sweetwater County. She'd laughed when she first read it, laughed and thought about how even a Wyoming rancher who advertised for a wife probably had standards, probably pictured some sturdy but pretty frontier girl, someone who could churn butter and still turn heads at a barn dance. But that night, with Caroline's words still ringing in her ears and the taste of humiliation coating her tongue, Mara pulled out her writing paper and composed a letter. She didn't lie. That seemed important somehow. She told him she was 26, unmarried, and unlikely to receive other offers. She told him she could read, write, keep accounts, and had helped run her father's household since her mother's hands had grown too twisted with arthritis for fine work. She told him she had no romantic illusions and expected none in return. What she didn't tell him, because how could she fit it into words, was that she was suffocating in Boston, that every day felt like drowning in shallow water, where everyone could see her struggling, but no one reached out a hand, that she'd rather die trying to survive in Wyoming than spend one more year dying slowly in her childhood bedroom, while her family pretended she didn't exist except when they needed someone to mock. She mailed the letter the next morning before courage could fail her. Then she tried to forget about it. 3 weeks later, the response arrived. Mara was in the parlor, darning socks, because that's what unmarried daughters did when they had nothing else to occupy their useless hands, when her father brought in the mail. He sorted through it with his usual efficiency, bills in one pile, letters from business associates in another, social correspondence for her mother in a third. He paused at a thin envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. squinted at the return address. Mara, you have a letter from Wyoming. The sock dropped from her hands. Caroline looked up from her magazine with sudden predatory interest. Even their mother stopped pretending to doze in her chair by the window. Wyoming? Caroline's eyebrows arched. Do you know someone in Wyoming, Mara? How exciting. I didn't think you knew anyone at all. Mara crossed the room and took the letter from her father's hands. Her name was written in dark, blocky letters. Miss Mara Holloway. The handwriting wasn't elegant or educated looking. It was the handwriting of someone who wrote rarely and reluctantly, someone who used words the way other men use tools. It's nothing, she said, tucking the envelope into her apron pocket. Just a friend. Caroline's laugh was light and knowing. A friend? In Wyoming? You're going to have to do better than that. But Mara was already leaving the parlor, climbing the stairs to her room with her heart hammering against her ribs. She locked the door again. It seemed like she was always locking doors against her own family, and opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter inside was even shorter than hers had been. Miss Holloway, your letter received. Terms acceptable. I'm sending train fare to Sweetwater Station. Wire arrival date. I'll meet you there. We'll marry at the local church, and you'll live at Windscar Ridge as my wife and help raise my son. If you're coming, come soon. Winter's early out here. Dane Mercer. There was no greeting, no pleasantries, no attempt at warmth or courtship, just facts, laid out like fence posts. And tucked into the envelope was a bank draft for train fare, enough to get her all the way across the country to a place she'd never seen, to marry a man she'd never met, to start a life she couldn't even imagine. Mara sat on her bed and read the letter 3 times. Her practical mind cataloged everything it didn't say. He hadn't mentioned how old he was, what he looked like, whether he was kind or cruel or anything in between. He'd mentioned a son but not a dead wife, though the absence of a wife seemed obvious enough. He'd offered no reassurances, no promises, nothing to make the proposition sound like anything other than what it was. A transaction. She should refuse. Any sane woman would refuse. A man who couldn't even manage a kind word in a letter probably wasn't going to be any kinder in person. And Wyoming was 3,000 miles away, a foreign country compared to Boston. She'd be completely alone out there, completely dependent on a stranger who might turn out to be a monster. Caroline's voice drifted up from downstairs, laughing at something their mother had said. The sound scraped against Mara's nerves like steel on stone. She pulled out her writing paper again. Mr. Mercer, I'll arrive October 18th on the afternoon train. I'll wear a gray traveling suit and carry a brown carpet bag. Mara Holloway. She mailed it that afternoon and spent the next 2 weeks preparing for a journey into the unknown. She sold what little jewelry she owned, a pearl necklace from a grandmother she barely remembered, some silver hair combs that had never suited her anyway, and bought sturdy dresses in dark colors, practical boots, and a warm coat. She packed her books because she couldn't bear to leave them behind, even though they were heavy. She told her family she was going to be a governess for a family in Colorado, which was close enough to the truth that the lie didn't choke her. Her mother cried. Her father looked relieved. Caroline hugged her at the train station and whispered, "Don't come back unless you've lost weight. It would be too embarrassing." Mara got on the train and didn't look back. The journey west took 4 days and felt like falling through time. Each mile carried her further from everything familiar until Boston seemed like a dream she'd had once and half forgotten. The landscape changed outside the train window, cities giving way to towns, towns to settlements, settlements to endless stretches of grass and sky that made her feel both terrified and strangely free. She shared a compartment with 2 other women for part of the journey. One was a young bride heading to San Francisco to meet her new husband, a gold prospector who'd struck it rich and sent for her. She chattered constantly about her wedding dress, about the house he'd promised to build, about the children they'd have. The other woman was older, harder, a widow going to live with her daughter's family in Utah. She spent most of this trip staring out the window with an expression that suggested she was regretting every choice that had led her to this moment. Mara didn't tell them why she was traveling. When they asked, she said she was visiting a cousin. The lie was easier than the truth, and she'd grown tired of the way people looked at her when she tried to explain things honestly. On the last night before Sweetwater Station, she barely slept. The train rattled and swayed, and her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. What if he took one look at her and refused to go through with the marriage? What if he was cruel? What if his son hated her, What if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life and it was too late to turn back? But when dawn broke over Wyoming, all endless sky and rolling prairie that stretched to the horizon like an ocean made of grass, something in her chest eased. This was a place where you could disappear, where you could become someone new, where maybe, just maybe, nobody would care what you looked like as long as you could survive. The train pulled into Sweetwater Station at 3 in the afternoon. It wasn't much. A wooden platform, a small station house, and a handful of buildings clustered along a dirt main street like they were huddling together for warmth. The wind hit her the moment she stepped off the train, cold and constant, carrying the smell of sage and distance. Mara stood on the platform with her carpet bag in one hand and her courage in the other, searching the handful of people waiting there. A few families, an older couple, 2 men in cowboy hats who looked through her like she was transparent. Then she saw him. Dane Mercer stood apart from the others, leaning against a fence post like he was holding it up, instead of the other way around. Tall, taller than any man she'd ever met, with shoulders that seemed built for carrying impossible loads. He wore dark pants, a work shirt, a leather vest that had seen better years, and a hat pulled low enough that she couldn't see his eyes. His face was all hard angles and weathered skin, the kind of face that belonged on a mountain or carved from granite. There was nothing soft about him, nothing welcoming. He was looking right at her. Their eyes met across the platform, and Mara felt something drop in her stomach. Not attraction. She was too practical for that. But recognition, maybe. Or resignation. The sense that they were both standing on the edge of something they couldn't take back. She walked toward him, lifting her chin the way she always did when she expected rejection. Better to face it head on than let it sneak up from behind. He pushed off from the fence post and closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Not because he was trying to be. His expression was neutral, almost blank, but because he occupied space the way a storm did, like there was weather happening inside him that might break loose at any moment. Miss Holloway. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much and wasn't quite sure how. Mr. Mercer. They stood there, 2 strangers evaluating each other in the Wyoming wind. His gaze moved over her face, down to her traveling suit, back up again. She waited for it. The disappointment, the tightening around his eyes, the slight step back that would tell her he'd changed his mind. It didn't come. Train was on time, he said finally. That's lucky. Usually runs late. I'm glad I didn't keep you waiting. Wouldn't have mattered. He reached for her carpet bag. That all you brought? I have a trunk. It should be. I'll get it. He turned toward the baggage car, then paused and looked back at her. Something flickered across his face. Not quite emotion, but the shadow of it. Preacher's waiting at the church. We'll get married now. Head back to the ranch before dark. That all right with you? Mara's heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. Get married now. Right now. In the next hour, she'd be someone's wife. This man's wife. She'd wake up tomorrow in a place called Windscar Ridge, and the life she'd known would be completely, irrevocably over. That's fine, she said. He nodded once, sharp and final, and went to retrieve her trunk. Mara stood alone on the platform and watched him walk away. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her skirt and made herself breathe slowly, deliberately. She'd made her choice back in Boston when she wrote that first letter. Everything else was just following through. A woman's voice spoke behind her, kind but curious. You're the mail-order bride, aren't you, for Dane Mercer? Mara turned to find a middle-aged woman in a blue dress and worn shawl, her face lined with the kind of creases that came from smiling often. She had shrewd eyes that weren't unkind, just assessing. Yes, Mara said. I am. The woman's expression shifted, surprise maybe, or concern. That's brave of you. Dane's a good man, but he's a hard one. Lost his first wife 3 years back. Hasn't been quite right since. I'm not expecting easy, Mara said quietly. No, I don't imagine you are. The woman's eyes softened. I'm Martha Webb. My husband runs the general store in town. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you come find me, all right? It was the first genuine kindness anyone had offered her in longer than she could remember. Mara felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first winter at Windscar Ridge. Martha patted her arm and moved away, back toward town. Dane returned carrying her trunk like it weighed nothing. He loaded it into the back of a wagon that had seen hard use, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hand was calloused and warm when she took it. Strong. He didn't let go until she was settled, and then he released her carefully, like she might break if he wasn't cautious. They drove to the church in silence. It was a small white building at the end of the main street, simple and clean with a cross on top that looked too fragile against the huge Wyoming sky. The preacher was waiting on the steps, an older man with kind eyes and the air of someone who'd officiated at too many weddings to be surprised by anything. "Dane," he greeted. Then his gaze moved to Mara. "And you must be Miss Holloway. Welcome to Sweetwater." "Thank you." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Shall we?" The preacher gestured toward the church doors. The ceremony was brief and strangely businesslike. They stood in front of the altar in the empty church, just the three of them, and the afternoon light filtering through plain glass windows. The preacher read from his prayer book. Dane said, "I do," in that rough, reluctant voice. Mara said, "I do," and wondered if she was lying. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The preacher closed his book with a soft thump. "You may kiss the bride." Dane looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned down. He had to lean down quite far and pressed his lips to hers. It was quick, chaste, nothing like the romantic kisses described in the novels she used to read. It felt like sealing a contract. When he pulled back, his expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. They signed the certificate. The preacher congratulated them. Dane paid him with coins from his pocket and shook his hand. And then they were walking back out into the October afternoon as husband and wife. The ride to Windscar Ridge took 2 hours. Dane drove the wagon with steady, practiced hands, and Mara sat beside him trying to think of something to say that wouldn't sound ridiculous. The silence stretched between them, like the prairie stretching in every direction, vast and impossible to cross. Finally, she tried. "Your letter mentioned a son. Eli." Dane's jaw tightened. "He's 6. Hasn't talked since his mother died." The words landed like stones. Mara absorbed them carefully. "He doesn't speak at all?" "Doctor says there's nothing wrong with him. Says it's grief." Dane's hands flexed on the reins. "I don't know how to fix it." "Maybe he doesn't need fixing," Mara said quietly. "Maybe he just needs time." Dane glanced at her then, really looked at her for the first time. Something shifted in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Like maybe she'd said something he needed to hear. "Maybe," he said. They didn't talk much after that. The land swallowed them up. Rolling hills covered in brown grass, scattered stands of cottonwood trees, and always the wind, constant and cold. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when Windscar Ridge finally came into view. It wasn't much. A main house built from rough-hewn logs, a barn that sagged slightly to one side, a few outbuildings scattered around like dice thrown carelessly across a table, fences marked off pastures where cattle grazed, dark shapes against the darkening grass. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. It looked lonely, hard, like the kind of place where you either grew stronger or broke completely. "Home," Dane said, and Mara couldn't tell if it was a welcome or a warning. He pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, then came around to help her. This time when she took his hand, she noticed how carefully he steadied her, how he didn't let go until her feet were solid on the ground. The front door opened and a small figure appeared, a boy with dark hair and his father's serious eyes. He stood in the doorway watching them with an intensity that seemed too old for 6 years. "Eli," Dane said, "this is Mara. She's going to be staying with us." The boy's gaze moved from his father to Mara and back again. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just looked at her with an expression that was somehow both curious and guarded. Mara crouched down so they were at eye level. Her skirts pooled in the dirt around her. "Hello, Eli," she said softly. "I'm glad to meet you." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and disappeared back into the house without a sound. Dane exhaled slowly. "He'll get used to you." "I know." Mara straightened, brushing dirt from her skirt. She looked at the house, at the barn, at the endless stretch of land surrounding them on all sides. "Mr. Mercer?" "Dane. Dane." The name felt strange in her mouth. "I need you to understand something. I didn't come here expecting love or romance or whatever it is women are supposed to want. I came here because I needed a place where I could be useful, where I could matter. I'll work hard. I'll take care of Eli. I'll do whatever needs doing. But I need to know that's enough, that you're not going to wake up one morning and regret this. He was quiet for so long she thought maybe he wasn't going to answer. The wind pushed against them both, cold and insistent. Finally, he spoke. I regret a lot of things, Mara. But right now, standing here with you, I don't regret this. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. Come on, I'll show you the house. Mara followed him across the threshold into her new life. The house was dim and smelled like wood smoke and loneliness. Simple furniture, clean but worn. A kitchen that needed a woman's touch. A fireplace that needed tending. Everything practical and nothing beautiful, which suited her just fine. Dane set her trunk down in a small bedroom off the main room. This was supposed to be a sewing room, he said. Never got around to it. You can use it however you want. This is my room? Mara looked at him, surprised. I sleep upstairs. Eli's room is next to mine. Dane's expression was carefully neutral. I told you this wasn't about romance. I meant it. When you're ready to share a bed, you let me know. Until then, this is yours. Relief and something else, something she didn't want to name, flooded through her. Thank you. He nodded once and turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. I should tell you, the ranch hands will be here for breakfast at 6. There's 6 of them, and they eat like they're afraid it's their last meal. If that's going to be a problem, it's not a problem, Mara said firmly. I've been cooking for my family since I was 12. 6 ranch hands should be easy. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. We'll see, he said, and left her alone. Mara stood in the center of her small room and listened to the house settling around her. Footsteps overhead, Dane walking across the floor above. A door closing somewhere, the wind rattling the windows. She was 3,000 miles from everything she'd ever known, married to a stranger, responsible for a child who didn't speak, about to start cooking for a household of men who would probably judge her every move. She unpacked her trunk with steady hands, hung up her dresses, arranged her books on the small shelf by the bed, set out her hairbrush and the few personal items she'd brought. When everything was in its place, she stood at the window and looked out at the darkening prairie. She thought about Caroline, probably sitting in the Boston parlor right now, laughing with their mother about some poor girl's unfortunate dress at Sunday service. She thought about the dining room where she'd spent 26 years being invisible, except when she was being mocked. She thought about every man who'd ever looked through her like she was glass. Then she thought about Dane's hand, steadying her as she climbed down from the wagon. The way he'd said, I don't regret this, like he meant it. The way Eli had looked at her, wary but curious, like maybe she was something worth investigating. It wasn't love. It wasn't romance. It wasn't anything close to what she'd dreamed about as a girl reading novels by candlelight. But it was hers. A place where she could be useful, where she could matter, where maybe, finally, she could stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. Mara pressed her palm flat against the window glass and felt the cold bleeding through. Winter's early out here, Dane had written. She'd survived 26 Boston winters being frozen out by her own family. Wyoming couldn't possibly be worse. Gus. Morning came early at Windscar Ridge. Mara woke to darkness and the sound of boots on the porch. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that meant men were already working while she was still trying to figure out where she was. She dressed quickly in the dim pre-dawn light, braided her hair with efficient fingers, and made her way to the kitchen. Dane was already there, building up the fire in the stove. He glanced at her, nodded once, and went back to work. Coffee's on, he said. Cups are in the cupboard there. Mara poured herself a cup and surveyed the kitchen. It was bigger than she'd realized last night, with a large work table, a good-sized stove, and plenty of storage. Everything was clean but impersonal, like no one had cared about it in a long time. The men will be here in 30 minutes, Dane said, straightening from the stove. Usually I make biscuits and fry up some bacon. That acceptable to you? Do you have eggs? Chickens are out back. Coop needs attention, but they still lay. Then I'll make eggs too, and if you have any preserves or jam, there's some in the cellar, apple butter mostly. Sarah used to make it. The name hung in the air between them. Sarah, his dead wife. The woman whose absence filled this house like smoke. I'll get it, Mara said quietly. She found the cellar stairs and descended into cool darkness that smelled like earth and stored food. Jars lined the shelves, preserves and pickles and vegetables put up by hands that no longer existed. She took the apple butter and climbed back up into the kitchen, where Dane was slicing bacon with methodical precision. They worked in silence. Mara mixed biscuit dough while Dane got the bacon started, and she was surprised by how easily they moved around each other in the small space. He seemed to know instinctively when to step aside, when to reach past her for something, like they'd been doing this dance for years instead of hours. The biscuits went into the oven. The bacon sizzled. Mara cracked eggs into a bowl and whisked them with a fork, then poured them into a heated pan with butter. The kitchen filled with smells of breakfast and warmth, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt almost normal. The ranch hands arrived right on time, stomping dirt off their boots on the porch. 6 men filed into the kitchen, rough and weather-beaten and clearly starving. They stopped short when they saw Mara. "Boys," Dane said evenly, "this is Mara. We got married yesterday. She's the new Mrs. Mercer, and she'll be handling the cooking from now on." 6 pairs of eyes stared at her. Mara stared back, chin up, waiting for the comments, the smirks, the whispered words they thought she couldn't hear. An older man with a gray beard stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm Dutch. Been with Dane since before Eli was born. Welcome to Windscar Ridge." The others followed his lead, introducing themselves one by one. Tom, a young cowboy who couldn't be more than 20. Pete and Jesse, brothers who looked almost identical. Carlos, quiet and watchful. And Frank, who had kind eyes and a limp he tried to hide. "Breakfast is ready," Mara said. "I hope you're hungry." They descended on the food like locusts. Mara watched, slightly stunned, as plates emptied and refilled and emptied again. She'd made what she thought was too much, but within 20 minutes, everything was gone except for 3 biscuits and a small pile of eggs. "Ma'am," Dutch said, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction, "that was the best breakfast we've had in 3 years." The others murmured agreement. Even Dane looked surprised. "It's just food," Mara said, but something warm uncurled in her chest. Pride, maybe? Or just the simple pleasure of being useful. "Could use more of this kind of just food," Tom said with a grin. "Last time Dane cooked, we nearly died." "I kept you alive," Dane said mildly. "That's all I promised." "Alive isn't the same as living, boss." Tom reached for one of the remaining biscuits. "No offense. None taken." Dane stood and gestured to the men. "All right, enough. We've got fences to check and cattle to move. Let's go." The men filed out, calling thanks over their shoulders. Dutch lingered for a moment, his weathered face serious. "Mrs. Mercer," he said quietly, "it's good to have a woman's presence here again. This place has been hurting for it." Then he was gone, and Mara was alone with Dane in the kitchen full of dirty dishes. She started gathering plates. Dane caught her wrist gently, stopping her. "You don't have to do this all at once," he said. "Take a day to settle in." "I'm already settled. This is what I'm here for." He studied her face. "Why did you really come here, Mara?" The question caught her off guard. She could lie. Give him some simple answer about wanting adventure or needing a fresh start. But there'd been enough lies in her life. And something about Dane Mercer made her want to be honest, even when honesty hurt. "Because nobody wanted me," she said simply. "And I got tired of pretending that didn't matter." His hand was still on her wrist, warm and solid. "Their loss," he said finally. Then he released her and headed for the door. "I'll be out with the men until dark. Eli's probably in the barn. He spends most of his time there." He was gone before she could respond. Mara finished the dishes, her mind turning over his words. Their loss. Such a simple thing to say, and probably not even true, but it lodged somewhere deep in her chest and stayed there, warm and unexpected. She found Eli in the barn, just like Dane said. The boy was sitting in an empty stall, drawing something in the dirt with a stick. He looked up when she approached, his dark eyes wary. "Can I sit with you?" Mara asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. Mara lowered herself onto the straw-covered floor, her back against the stall wall, and waited. After a long silence, she started talking. Not to him exactly. Just talking, the way you might talk to yourself when you're trying to work through a problem. "I'm not very good at this," she said. "Being a mother, I mean. I never had children. Never thought I would. But here I am, and here you are, and I suppose we'll have to figure it out together." She paused. "Your father seems like a good man. Hard, maybe, but good. And this place, it's rough, but there's something about it, something honest." Eli's stick moved across the dirt. She couldn't see what he was drawing. "I know you miss your mother," Mara continued softly. "I'm not trying to replace her. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But I'm here now, and I'm going to take care of you the best I can, even if you never talk to me, even if you hate me. That's just how it is." The stick stopped moving. Eli looked at her directly for the first time, and Mara saw something in his expression that made her chest ache. Not hatred, not even resentment, just bone-deep loneliness that mirrored her own. She stayed with him until the light changed, and when she finally stood to go start lunch, she noticed what he'd been drawing in the dirt. A house. Not the house they lived in now, but something different, bigger, with windows that looked like eyes and a door that looked like a smile. Mara looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she looked at Eli. "That's beautiful," she said. "Is that what you want? A house like that?" He nodded once, barely perceptible. "Then we'll build it," Mara said. "Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but someday we'll build you that house." Eli stared at her like she'd just promised him the moon. Then he picked up his stick and went back to drawing. Mara walked back to the house with the Wyoming wind pushing at her back and the weight of a promise she had no idea how to keep settling on her shoulders. She'd made a lot of impossible promises in her life. This one, at least, felt worth keeping. The first month at Windscar Ridge passed in a blur of work that never seemed to end. Mara woke before dawn and fell into bed after dark, her hands raw from scrubbing and her back aching from hauling water and wood. She cooked 3 meals a day for 8 people, mended clothes that had been neglected for years, cleaned rooms that had accumulated 3 years of dust and grief, and tried to coax a silent 6-year-old into some semblance of childhood. Nobody thanked her. Nobody seemed to notice the curtains she'd washed and rehung, or the way the kitchen floor no longer stuck to your boots, or how the bread at dinner was actually soft instead of rock hard. The men ate and left. Dane worked from dawn to dusk and came home too exhausted for conversation. Eli watched her with those serious dark eyes, but never spoke, never smiled, never gave her any indication whether her presence made things better or worse. Some nights, alone in her small room with the wind howling outside, Mara wondered if she'd traded one form of invisibility for another. At least in Boston, she'd been ignored in comfort. Here, she was ignored while her body broke down piece by piece. But she didn't complain. Complaining would mean admitting she'd made a mistake, and Mara Holloway, Mara Mercer now, didn't make mistakes. She just made choices and lived with them. It was early November when everything shifted. She was in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, when she heard raised voices outside. Not quite shouting, but close. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. 3 of the ranch hands, Tom, Pete, and Carlos, were standing near the barn in what looked like a serious argument. Tom's face was red, his hands gesturing wildly. Pete had his arms crossed, his jaw set. Carlos stood between them, looking like he was trying to prevent a fight and failing. Mara glanced at the bread dough. It needed another 10 minutes of kneading. But those men looked about 2 seconds away from throwing punches, and Dane was out checking the north fence line with Dutch and wouldn't be back until afternoon. She made a decision. The cold hit her the moment she stepped outside, but she ignored it and walked straight toward the argument. All 3 men saw her coming and had the grace to look embarrassed, but they didn't stop talking. "Telling you it's a waste of time," Tom was saying. "We should move them to the lower pasture before the snow comes." "And I'm telling you that pasture's got bad water," Pete shot back. "Lost 6 head there 2 years ago. You want that to happen again?" "That was different. The creek was—" "Gentlemen." Mara's voice cut through the argument like a knife. All 3 men turned to look at her. "What's the problem?" Tom opened his mouth, but Pete spoke first. "No disrespect, ma'am, but this is ranch business." "Ranch business that's being discussed loud enough to scare the chickens," Mara said dryly. "And since I'm part of this ranch now, I'd say it's my business too. So what's the problem?" The men exchanged glances. Carlos cleared his throat. "It's about moving the cattle, ma'am. Tom wants to move them to the lower pasture for winter grazing. Pete thinks the water there isn't safe." "Is it safe?" Mara asked Pete directly. He shifted his weight. "Don't know. Could be. But 2 years ago, something made cattle sick down there. Could have been the water, could have been something else. I just don't want to take the chance. And you? Mara turned to Tom. Why do you want to move them? Because the grass is better down there, and we need to preserve the upper pasture for spring calving. It's basic rotation, ma'am. We've done it every year. Except the year the cattle got sick, Pete muttered. Tom's hands curled into fists. That's got nothing to do with enough. Mara held up a hand. Has anyone actually checked the water in the lower pasture recently? Silence. The men looked at each other again. I'll take that as a no, Mara said. So here's what we're going to do. Carlos, you're going to ride down to the lower pasture and check that creek. Look for anything dead in it, anything that looks off, any sign of contamination. Tom, you're going to check the grass situation in both pastures and give me an honest assessment of whether the lower pasture is actually better or if you just want to win this argument. Pete, you're going to pull the records from 2 years ago and find out exactly how many cattle got sick and when. Then tonight at dinner, you're all going to present your findings, and we'll make a decision based on facts instead of shouting matches. Understood? The men stared at her like she'd just sprouted a second head. Ma'am, Tom said slowly, that's how we do things now, Mara said firmly. Unless you'd rather I get Dane involved, in which case he'll probably just fire all three of you for wasting time arguing instead of working. That got them moving. Carlos headed for his horse. Tom stalked off toward the pastures. Pete went into the barn, presumably to find the old records. Mara stood in the cold Wyoming morning and watched them scatter, feeling something strange and powerful settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly. More like the realization that maybe she wasn't as powerless here as she'd thought. She went back inside to her bread dough. That evening, the three men presented their findings at dinner like schoolboys giving reports. The water was clean, the grass was marginally better in the lower pasture, but not significantly. The cattle sickness 2 years ago had happened in spring, not winter, and had likely been caused by toxic plants growing near the creek that weren't there anymore. So we moved them, Dane said after listening to everything. He looked at Mara across the table, something unreadable in his expression. Good call. It wasn't much, just 2 words. But coming from Dane Mercer, who spoke as rarely as his son, it felt like a parade. After that, things changed. Subtle at first. The men started asking Mara's opinion on things. Where to store equipment for winter, whether to repair the chicken coop or build a new one, how to organize the tack room. She suspected they did it partly because she gave sensible answers, and partly because she didn't talk down to them the way some women might have. Dutch told her one morning, while helping her haul water from the well, that she reminded him of his own mother. She was a tough woman, he said, his weathered face creasing into something like a smile. Raised 6 boys on a homestead in Nebraska. Nothing scared her, not weather, not Indians, not even my father when he got liquored up and mean. She'd just look at him and say, "That's enough now," and damned if he didn't stop every time. I'm not that tough, Mara said. Maybe not yet. Dutch hefted the water bucket. But you're getting there. Dane heard about the cattle argument from the men that night. Mara was cleaning up after dinner when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, hat in his hands. You handled that situation with Tom and Pete, he said without preamble. The men are talking about it. Mara's hand stilled in the dishwater. She couldn't tell from his tone whether he was angry or not. I'm sorry if I overstepped. They were about to come to blows, and you weren't here, and someone needed to. You didn't overstep. Dane moved closer, his boots loud on the clean floor. You did exactly what needed doing. I'm just surprised you knew how. I ran my father's household for years, Mara said quietly. Men aren't that different from stubborn horses. Sometimes they just need someone to tell them where to go. The corner of Dane's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough to make Mara's breath catch. That's one way to put it. They stood there in the kitchen, the silence between them less empty than usual. Mara could hear the wind outside, the crackling of the fire in the next room, her own heartbeat loud in her ears. You're good at this, Dane said finally. Running things. Managing people. I didn't expect that. What did you expect? I don't know. He turned his hat in his hands, studying it like it held answers. Someone quiet. Someone who'd stay out of the way. Someone who needed taking care of instead of someone who'd take care of everything else. Disappointed? The word came out sharper than she intended. No. He looked up and his eyes were serious. Opposite of disappointed. I just wish I'd found you 3 years ago. Sarah hated it here. She tried, but she hated every minute of it. The isolation, the work, the cold. I always thought if I could just make it easier for her somehow. He trailed off, jaw tightening. Mara dried her hands on a towel, choosing her words carefully. I'm not Sarah. I know, and I don't hate it here. She met his eyes. It's hard, and I'm tired all the time, and sometimes I think my hands are going to fall off from all the work. But I don't hate it. This place makes sense to me. The rules are simple. Work hard, survive, don't complain. That I can do. Yeah, Dane said softly. I'm starting to see that. He left her alone in the kitchen, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had developed a crack. Winter came to Windscar Ridge like a siege. The first real snow hit in late November, turning the world white and silent and impossible. Mara woke up one morning to find frost patterns on the inside of her bedroom window and her breath visible in the air. The temperature had dropped so far overnight that the water in the washing basin had frozen solid. She dressed in every layer she owned and made her way to the kitchen, where Dane was already building up the fire. Going to be a bad one, he said without turning around. Temperature's still dropping. How bad? Bad enough that we're bringing the men into the house. They can't stay in the bunkhouse in this. They'll freeze. Mara looked around the small main room. Where will they sleep? Anywhere there's floor space. We'll make it work. By mid-morning, all 6 ranch hands had moved into the house with their bedrolls and personal belongings. The main room transformed into a crowded, chaotic space filled with the smell of wet wool and male bodies and horses. Privacy became a memory. Personal space ceased to exist. But nobody complained. When you were fighting to survive a Wyoming winter, you didn't worry about comfort. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped inside with 8 men and 1 silent boy, all of them restless and bored and getting on each other's nerves. The wind screamed outside like something alive and angry. Snow piled up against the windows until the house felt like a cave. Mara cooked until she thought she might collapse from exhaustion. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and endless pots of coffee to keep everyone warm and occupied. She mediated arguments, broke up card games that were getting too intense, and once physically stepped between Dutch and Frank when a disagreement about politics nearly turned violent. Outside, she'd said firmly, pointing at the door. Both of you. You want to fight, freeze to death doing it, but you're not tearing up my kitchen. They'd looked at her, looked at each other, and sat back down sheepishly. On the 3rd night, with everyone packed into the main room and the fire burning low, Tom pulled out a harmonica and started playing. It was a mournful sound, lonely and beautiful, like the wind made music. One by one, the other men joined in, not with instruments, but with their voices. Rough, untrained voices singing songs about home and loss, and the kind of loneliness that only existed in places like this. Mara sat in a rocking chair near the fire with a basket of mending in her lap, listening. Eli was curled up at her feet, as close as he ever got to anyone, his small body warm against her leg. Dane stood near the window, looking out at the wall of white, his face unreadable. Dutch started singing a ballad about a woman who'd waited 20 years for a man who never came home. His voice cracked on the high notes, but nobody laughed. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the wind. My mother used to sing that, Carlos said softly. Back in Mexico, before we came north. Your mother still alive? Frank asked. Don't know. Haven't seen her in 10 years. Carlos stared at the fire. Probably thinks I'm dead. The words hung in the air, heavy with all the things men didn't usually say out loud. Mara's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. She looked around at these rough, hard men who'd become her strange, makeshift family, and saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't just ranch hands, they were exiles. People who'd ended up in Wyoming because they had nowhere else to go. No one else who wanted them. Just like her. She doesn't think you're dead, Mara said quietly. Mothers don't give up that easy. She's probably lighting candles for you every Sunday, praying you're safe and warm and thinking of her. Carlos looked at her, his eyes wet. You think? I know. Mara went back to her mending. That's what mothers do. The storm broke the next morning. They woke to silence so profound it felt unnatural, and when Dane opened the front door, the world outside was transformed. Snow covered everything, the buildings, the fences, the land as far as the eye could see. The sky was blue and clear, and the sun reflecting off the snow was so bright it hurt to look at. Jesus, Tom whispered. Must be 3 feet deep. 4 in the drifts, Dane corrected. We need to dig out the barn, check on the cattle, make sure nothing collapsed under the weight. The men grabbed shovels and headed out into the frozen wasteland. Mara watched from the window as they worked, their breath steaming in the air, their bodies moving with the kind of determination that came from knowing their survival depended on it. She turned to find Eli standing beside her, staring out at the white world with wide eyes. "Want to go out?" she asked. He looked up at her, then back at the snow, then nodded slowly. Mara bundled him in every warm thing she could find, coat, scarf, hat, gloves that were too big for his small hands. Then she bundled herself up and led him outside into winter. The cold was shocking, stealing the breath from her lungs. But Eli's face, the wonder on his face as he looked at the snow, as he reached down and touched it with tentative fingers, made the discomfort worth it. He crouched down and scooped up a handful of snow, studying it like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Then he looked up at Mara, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Windscar Ridge, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. Mara felt something crack open in her chest. She smiled back and scooped up her own handful of snow. "You ever made a snowman?" Eli shook his head. "Me neither," Mara admitted, "but I bet we can figure it out." They spent the next hour building the ugliest, most lopsided snowman in the history of Wyoming. It had a crooked stick for an arm, rocks for eyes that didn't match, and a carrot nose that Eli had insisted on stealing from the root cellar. It leaned dramatically to the left and looked like it might collapse at any moment. Mara thought it was perfect. Dane found them there, covered in snow and laughing. Well, Mara was laughing, and Eli was making a sound that might have been laughing if you listened carefully enough. Dane stopped walking and just stared at them, his expression stunned. "He's smiling," Dane said, his voice rough. "He's actually smiling." "We made a snowman," Mara said, unnecessarily, gesturing at their creation. "Or something that's supposed to be a snowman. We're not really sure." Dane walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. He looked at Eli, at the snowman, at Mara. "I haven't seen him smile since Sarah died," he said quietly. "I thought maybe he'd forgotten how." Eli ran to his father and grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the snowman with an urgency that was almost speaking. "Look," his eyes said. "Look what we made." Dane crouched down next to his son, and Mara saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "It's a good snowman, Eli. Real good." Eli beamed. Actually beamed. Then he let go of his father's hand and ran back to Mara, grabbing her hand instead and tugging her toward the house. "I think he's cold," Mara said, "and probably hungry. We should get inside." But as she walked past Dane, he caught her arm gently. "Thank you," he said, and the words sounded like they cost him something. "Whatever you did, however you reached him, thank you." "I didn't do anything special," Mara said. "I just built a snowman with him. That's more than I've managed in 3 years. Dane released her arm. "You're good with him. Better than I am." "You're his father. He loves you." Love and understanding aren't the same thing. Dane looked at his son, who was trying to get the snow off his boots by stomping on the porch. "I don't understand him. Don't understand what he needs or how to give it to him, but you do." "I understand being lonely," Mara said simply. "That's all." That night, after everyone had eaten and the house had settled into the quiet rhythm of evening, Mara found Eli in his room. He was sitting on his bed, holding a small wooden horse that looked hand-carved, his fingers tracing its worn edges. She knocked on the doorframe. "Can I come in?" He nodded. Mara sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to crowd him. "That's a nice horse." Eli held it out to her. She took it carefully, examining the craftsmanship. Someone had spent hours on this, carving each detail with love and patience. "Did your mother make this?" He nodded again, his eyes serious. "She must have loved you very much." His small face crumpled. Not crying, not quite, but something close. Mara's heart broke. "Eli," she said softly, "I want you to know something. I'm not trying to be your mother. I could never be her. But I'm here, and I care about you. and I'm going to take care of you the best I know how. Even on the days when you're angry at me. Even on the days when you wish I'd leave. I'm staying. That's a promise." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the wooden horse aside, crawled across the bed, and wrapped his small arms around her neck. Mara held him carefully, like he was made of glass and might shatter. He didn't make a sound, but she felt his tears soaking through her collar. "I know," she whispered. "I know it hurts. But you're not alone, you hear me? You're not alone." When Eli finally pulled away, his eyes were red but calmer. He climbed under his blankets, and Mara tucked him in the way she imagined mothers were supposed to, smoothing the covers, brushing hair from his forehead, making sure he was warm enough. "Good night," she said. As she reached the door, Eli's voice stopped her. "Night." It was barely a whisper. One word, but it was the first word she'd heard him speak. Mara turned back, tears streaming down her face. "Good night, sweetheart," she managed. She found Dane in the kitchen, staring at the cold stove like it held answers. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him stand up fast. "What happened? Is Eli—" "Tss!" "He spoke." Mara's voice shook. "He said good night." One word, but he spoke, Dane. He actually spoke. The expression that crossed Dane's face was something close to devastation. He sat down heavily in a chair, his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. Mara didn't think. She just crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him, the way she'd done with Eli. Dane stiffened at first, then he turned and buried his face against her shoulder, and she realized he was crying. This hard, stern man was crying like the world had cracked open. "I couldn't reach him," he said, his voice muffled. 3 years, Mara. 3 years I've tried everything, and I couldn't reach him. You've been here barely a month, and—" "Stop," Mara said firmly. "Stop doing that. You kept him alive. You kept this ranch running. You survived losing your wife while raising a traumatized child and managing 6 employees and fighting off winter and everything else this place throws at you. You did that, not me. I just showed up and built a snowman." Dane pulled back, his eyes red. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make everything sound simple when it's not." "Because most things are simple," Mara said. "We just make them complicated because we're scared of the simple answer." He looked at her like she was the most confusing person he'd ever met. Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss at their wedding, brief and obligatory. This was real. His lips were chapped from the cold and his hands were rough where they cupped her face, and Mara felt something ignite in her chest that she'd thought was dead forever. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I shouldn't have done that," Dane said. "Why not?" "Because you deserve better than me grabbing you in a kitchen after falling apart." "Dane Mercer," Mara said, her voice steady, "I didn't come here expecting poetry and roses. I came here expecting reality. That was real. And if you're asking my opinion, I'd say you should do it again." He did. This time, Mara kissed him back, pouring 3 years of loneliness and 1 month of hard-won hope into it. His arms came around her, solid and warm, and for the first time since arriving at Windscar Ridge, she felt like maybe she'd come home. When they finally broke apart, Dane rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not good at this," he said quietly. "The talking, the feelings, any of it. Sarah used to say I had the emotional range of a fence post." "Fence posts hold things up," Mara pointed out. "That's not nothing." He laughed, actually laughed, a rusty sound like he'd forgotten how. "You're going to be the death of me, woman. Or the making of you. Haven't decided yet." They stood in the kitchen holding each other while the house settled around them and winter pressed against the windows. Outside, Wyoming stretched forever in every direction, cold and hard and unforgiving. But inside, in this moment, they had warmth. It was enough. The winter tested them in ways Mara hadn't imagined. More storms came, each one feeling like it might be the one that finally broke them. The cattle suffered despite their best efforts. Some died, froze to death in the fields, and the men came back from finding them with faces like stone. The chickens stopped laying. The root cellar supplies dwindled faster than expected. Everyone grew thin and tired and sharp-tempered, but they survived. Mara learned things she'd never thought she'd need to know. How to butcher a chicken, how to stretch a pound of flour into bread for 10 people, how to treat frostbite, how to keep men from killing each other when they were trapped inside for days with nothing to do but stare at walls and think about everything they'd lost. She also learned about Dane, piece by careful piece. He'd grown up on this ranch, the only child of parents who died when he was 19. He'd built Windscar Ridge from almost nothing, working himself half to death to prove he could make something of the hard land his father had left him. He'd married Sarah because he loved her, and because he'd thought love would be enough to make her happy here. It hadn't been. She cried a lot, Dane told Mara one night, his voice quiet in the darkness of the kitchen where they'd taken to sitting together after everyone else had gone to bed. Especially toward the end, said she felt like she was disappearing, like the prairie was erasing her. How did she die? Mara asked gently. Fever. Came on fast. By the time I got the doctor out here, it was too late. He stared at his hands. I was out checking the north fence when she got sick. Eli was with her. He watched her die, Mara. Watched his mother die while his father was off playing cowboy. You didn't know. Doesn't matter, I should have been there. He looked at her. I can't make that mistake again. Can't lose someone else because I was too busy with the damn ranch to notice they needed me. Mara understood then why he'd been so distant when she first arrived. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much and was terrified of it. I'm not disappearing, she said firmly. I'm not Sarah. I'm not fragile, and I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Dane Mercer. Better get used to it. His hand found hers in the darkness. Getting there, he said. By the time spring finally broke through winter's grip, Windscar Ridge had changed. The men had become a real crew instead of just hired hands, working together with the kind of efficiency that only came from shared survival. Eli spoke in short sentences now, mostly to Mara but sometimes to his father, his voice growing stronger each day. And Dane smiled occasionally, real smiles that reached his eyes, and made him look 10 years younger. But change brought its own problems. The spring thaw revealed damage from the winter, fences down, buildings that needed repair, pastures that would need work before they could support the herd. And money was tight, tighter than Mara had realized. She'd been going through the ranch accounts, trying to organize the chaotic records Dane had been keeping, and what she found made her stomach sink. They were barely breaking even. One bad season would ruin them. She waited until after dinner to bring it up, when the men had gone to the bunkhouse and Eli was in bed. Dane was at the kitchen table, working on saddle repair, when she sat down across from him. We need to talk about the finances, she said without preamble. His hands stilled. How bad? Bad enough that I'm worried. You've got debts to the bank, debts to suppliers, and unless we have a perfect season, we won't make enough to pay them all off. Dane set down the leather he'd been working on. I know. You know? Dane, if something goes wrong, then we lose everything. He said it calmly, like he'd already accepted it. That's how it works out here, Mara. You fight until you can't fight anymore, and then you lose. I watched my father do it. Now I'm doing it. No, Mara's voice was hard. That's not how this ends. We're not losing this ranch. You got a magic solution? I've got common sense and a decent head for numbers, which is more than you've got, apparently. She pulled out the ledger she'd been working on. Look at this. You're selling cattle at prices that barely cover your costs. You're buying supplies from vendors who are charging you double what you'd pay if you shopped around. And you're not claiming any of the government subsidies you're entitled to because you don't want to deal with the paperwork. Dane looked at the numbers, his jaw tight. Sarah used to handle all this. Well, now I'm handling it. Mara tapped the ledger. We're going to restructure everything. Find better buyers, better suppliers, and file for every subsidy and tax break we can get. It'll take work, but it's doable. You think you can save this place? I think we can save it together. She met his eyes. But I need you to trust me. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. I trust you, he said simply. It was the most important thing he'd ever said to her. They worked late into the night, making plans and lists and calculations. By the time they finally went to bed, still in separate rooms, though Mara suspected that wouldn't last much longer, they had the outline of a strategy that might actually work. Mara lay in her small room, exhausted and hopeful in equal measure. Outside, spring was happening. The land was waking up. And for the first time since arriving at Windscar Ridge, she believed they might actually survive what came next. She was wrong, but she didn't know that yet. The stranger rode on to Windscar Ridge on a Tuesday morning in late April, when the prairie grass was just starting to green and the air still carried the bite of winter. Mara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she saw him. A heavy-set man on a bay horse, dressed too fine for ranch work, picking his way up the road like he owned it. She didn't like him immediately. Something about the way he sat in that saddle, all false confidence and barely concealed contempt for everything around him, set her teeth on edge. Dane came out of the barn when he heard the horse, wiping his hands on his pants. Dutch and Tom followed, their expressions wary. Men didn't ride out here alone unless they wanted something, and what they wanted was rarely good. "Help you?" Dane called out. The stranger dismounted with unnecessary ceremony, making a show of adjusting his hat and brushing dust from his expensive coat. Up close, Mara could see he was older than she'd first thought, maybe 50, with soft hands and cold eyes that cataloged everything they touched. "Dane Mercer?" the man asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "That's right. Name's Silas Crow. I own the Circle C Ranch, about 20 miles west of here." He extended a hand. "Thought it was time we met, seeing as we're neighbors." Dane shook his hand briefly, his face carefully neutral. "Long way to ride just to say hello." "Well, I'm a friendly man." Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Besides, I had business to discuss. Thought we might talk inside, away from prying ears." Mara saw Dane's jaw tighten. She abandoned the laundry and walked toward them, her hands still damp from the wash water. "Anything you have to say to my husband, you can say in front of me," she said evenly. "I'm Mara Mercer." Crow's gaze moved over her with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. Not quite leering, but close enough. "Mrs. Mercer, pleasure. Didn't realize Dane had remarried. My condolences on your first wife, Mercer. Terrible thing, losing someone so young." "What do you want, Crow?" Dane asked, his voice flat. "Direct. I like that." Crow pulled a folded document from inside his coat. "I'll get straight to it then. I'm expanding my operations, consolidating land in this region. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for Windscar Ridge." The words fell like stones into still water. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Finally, Dane said, "This land's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price." Crow unfolded the document. "I'm offering $40,000, cash. That's more than this place is worth. And we both know it." "Then why offer it?" Mara asked quietly. Crow's eyes shifted to her, annoyed at the interruption. "Because I want the water rights, Mrs. Mercer. Your property controls access to Sweetwater Creek, which flows through my land downstream. With those rights, I can expand my herd significantly. Without them, I'm limited. Simple business." "And if we don't sell?" Dane's hands had curled into fists at his sides. "Then I'd hate to see you struggle through another hard season." Crow refolded the document slowly. "Cattle prices are dropping. Winter was rough on everyone. And I hear you've got some significant debts coming due. Bank won't extend credit forever, Mercer. Might be wise to take a sure thing while you can." "Get off my land," Dane said softly. "Now, let's not be hasty, Tito. I said get off my land." Dane took a step forward. "And don't come back. Windscar Ridge isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." Crow's expression hardened. The false friendliness dropped away, revealing something uglier underneath. "You're making a mistake. I was trying to be neighborly, but there are other ways to get what I want." "That a threat?" "That's a fact." Crow mounted his horse with practiced ease. "You think about my offer, Mercer. Think about what's best for your family, because winter's coming again, and it won't be any kinder than the last one." He rode off without looking back, leaving a wake of unease behind him. Dutch spat in the dirt. "That man's trouble, boss." "I know," Dane said. "Who is he really?" Mara asked. "Besides someone who wants our water." "Silas Crow owns half of Sweetwater County." Tom kicked at a stone. "And what he doesn't own, he's working on taking. My cousin worked for him once. Said Crow doesn't hear the word no very well." "He heard it today," Dane said grimly. "Come on. We've got work to do." But as the men dispersed, Mara saw the worry in Dane's eyes, the way his shoulders had tensed and stayed that way. She waited until they were alone in the kitchen before bringing it up. "How bad are the debts he mentioned?" Dane sat down heavily at the table. "Bad enough. I owe the bank $12,000 due in October. Another $4,000 to various suppliers. If we have a good season, we'll make it. If we don't, then we better have a good season, Mara said firmly. And we need to find out everything we can about Silas Crow. What he wants, what he's capable of, how he operates. You don't make an offer like that unless you're desperate or dangerous. Maybe both. Already dangerous, Dane muttered. Man like that doesn't get rich by playing fair. Over the next few weeks, they learned exactly how dangerous Silas Crow could be. Small things at first. Fence posts knocked down, gates left open, tools that went missing and then turned up broken. Nothing they could prove was deliberate, but too consistent to be coincidence. Then the cattle started disappearing. Not many. 2 here, 3 there. Just enough to hurt, but not enough to justify accusing anyone without proof. Dane rode out with the men every day, checking boundaries and counting heads, but the losses continued. Rustling, Dutch said flatly one evening after they discovered another gap in the herd. Someone's cutting out strays and driving them off. Old trick, hard to catch. Crow's men? Tom asked. Probably, but proving it's another matter. Mara watched Dane grow more tense, more silent, more like the man she'd first met at the train station. The brief warmth between them began to freeze over as worry consumed him. He worked longer hours, slept less, spoke in short, clipped sentences when he spoke at all. She tried to reach him, tried to talk about strategies, solutions, anything to break through the wall he was rebuilding around himself. But grief and fear had their hooks in him again, and he couldn't seem to shake free. I can't lose this place, he told her one night, staring at the account books like they were written in a foreign language. It's all I have, all Eli has. If Crow takes this ranch, he won't, Mara said. We won't let him. You don't know what you're dealing with. Men like Crow, they always win. They've got money, power, connections. We've got dirt and stubbornness. That's not enough. It's been enough so far. For how long? He looked at her and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the defeat creeping in at the edges. Maybe we should take his offer. 40,000 would pay off the debts and leave enough to start over somewhere else. You don't mean that, don't I? He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. What's the point of fighting when we're going to lose anyway? At least this way, we'd lose with some dignity, some money in our pockets. The point, Mara said, her voice sharp, is that this is your home, your father's home. You've bled for this land, Dane. You gonna just hand it over to some bully because he's got deeper pockets? Maybe I'm tired of bleeding. Then stop bleeding alone. She grabbed his arm when he tried to walk away. You've been doing this by yourself for 3 years. Carrying everything, trusting no one, refusing help. But I'm here now. Let me help. Let us help. The men, Eli, me, we're all in this with you. But you have to stop pushing us away. I'm not. Yes, you are. You're doing exactly what you did after Sarah died. Shutting down, locking up, trying to shoulder everything yourself until it crushes you. Mara stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. I didn't come here to watch you give up. I came here to fight. So either fight with me or get out of my way because I'm not letting Crow win. Dane stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, but not defeat either. You're terrifying when you're angry. Good. Maybe you'll start listening to me. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. What do you suggest? First, we stop reacting and start planning. Second, we find out who Crow has in his pocket. Law, banks, suppliers. Know the battlefield before you fight. Third, we make ourselves too expensive to destroy. If taking Windscar Ridge costs him more than it's worth, he'll back off. And how do we do that? By being smarter than him. Mara pulled the ledgers toward her. You know ranching. I know numbers and people. Together, we figure this out. They worked through the night, building a strategy piece by piece. By dawn, they had a plan. Not a perfect one, but a start. The next morning, Mara rode into Sweetwater with Dutch as escort. She'd never been to town without Dane, and part of her was nervous about going alone, but this was something she needed to do herself. Her first stop was the bank. She marched in like she owned the place, her best dress pressed and her spine straight, and asked to speak with the manager. He kept her waiting 20 minutes before finally seeing her, a calculated insult that Mara noted and filed away. The manager was a thin man with nervous hands and the look of someone who'd been pressured by bigger fish than him. Mrs. Mercer, he said without warmth, what can I do for you? I want to review the terms of my husband's loan. The loan is quite straightforward. $12,000 due in October, with interest at— I can read, Mara interrupted. I want to know if there are any clauses or penalties we should be aware of, any early payment discounts, any options for refinancing. The manager blinked. I don't believe that's been discussed. Then let's discuss it now. Mara leaned forward. We're prepared to make a partial payment today, $500, and we'd like to negotiate better terms for the remainder. 500. The manager's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his face. That's unexpected. However, I'm not sure I have the authority to— Then find someone who does. Mara kept her voice pleasant but firm. Because if we can't work something out here, we'll need to explore other options. I understand there's a new bank opening in Rock Springs. They might be interested in our business. It was a bluff. There was no new bank, and even if there was, they didn't have time to move their loans. But the manager didn't know that. He cleared his throat. Let me see what I can arrange. Perhaps if you could come back this afternoon. I'll wait. She did wait. 2 hours sitting in an uncomfortable chair while the manager scurried around, making her wait longer out of spite. But when he finally returned, he had papers for her to sign. New terms, slightly better interest rate, and an acknowledgement of the partial payment. Mara signed and walked out of that bank feeling like she'd won a battle. Small victory, but real. Her next stop was the general store. Martha Webb greeted her with genuine warmth, wiping flour from her hands. Mara, good to see you. How's life at the ranch? Complicated, Mara admitted. Martha, I need to ask you something. What do you know about Silas Crow? Martha's expression darkened. More than I'd like. Why? He been bothering you? He made an offer on our land. Dane refused. Now things are happening, cattle going missing, equipment breaking. Nothing we can prove, but it's Crow. Martha sighed. That man's a cancer on this county. He's squeezed out 3 ranches in the last 5 years. Makes an offer, you refuse, then suddenly your luck turns bad. Accidents happen. Loans get called in early. Supplies get delayed. By the time you realize what's happening, you're drowning, and he's the only one offering a life preserver. Has anyone fought back? Tom Hendricks tried. Stubborn old bastard refused to sell. His barn burned down 2 weeks later, lost all his winter feed, half his equipment. He sold to Crow a month after that. Martha lowered her voice. Nobody could prove anything, but everybody knew. Mara felt cold settle in her stomach. The law do anything? Sheriff's in Crow's pocket. Has been for years. Martha squeezed Mara's hand. I'm not trying to scare you, just want you to know what you're up against. If you're going to fight Crow, you need to be smart and you need to be careful. I plan to be both. On the ride back to the ranch, Mara's mind raced. Crow had the sheriff, the bank probably, and half the county too scared to stand against him. They were alone in this fight, and the odds were stacked higher than she'd realized. But she'd been fighting against odds her entire life. Being underestimated was something she knew how to use. When she got home, she found Dane and the men gathered in the barn, their faces grim. Her stomach dropped. What happened? North fence, Dutch said, torn down completely. About 20 head wandered off. We've been tracking them all afternoon, but the trail goes cold at Crow's property line. He took them onto his land, Tom said, his young face flushed with anger. Probably mixed them with his herd already. We'll never prove which ones are ours. Mara looked at Dane. His jaw was clenched so tight she thought it might break. We're riding over there, he said quietly. All of us. We're getting our cattle back. That's exactly what he wants, Mara said quickly. He's baiting you. You ride onto his property looking for a fight. He's got every right to defend his land. His men outnumber you. The sheriff will take his side. You'll end up in jail or worse, and Crow still gets the ranch. So we do nothing? Let him steal from us? We do something smart. Mara's mind was already working through possibilities. We document everything. Every missing cow, every damaged fence, every suspicious incident. We build a case, and then we take it to someone who can actually do something about it. The sheriff won't help, Frank said. Everyone knows he's bought. Then we go over his head, federal land office, territorial governor, someone. Mara looked at each of them. I know it's not satisfying. I know you want to ride over there and take what's yours. But that's how Crow wins. by making you react instead of think. Dane was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to the men. She's right. We do this smart. Dutch, you and Tom start documenting everything. Dates, times, damages. Frank, Pete, Jesse, keep close watch on the herd, double the patrols. Carlos, you're good with tracking. See if you can find proof of where our cattle went. I want evidence, not assumptions. The men dispersed slowly, frustration evident in their movements. When they were alone, Dane pulled Mara aside. I hate this, he said, sitting back while he picks us apart. I know, but we're not sitting back. We're playing a different game. She touched his face gently. Trust me, please. He leaned into her hand, his eyes closing briefly. I'm trying. That night, after dinner, Mara sat down with Eli to help him with his reading. He was doing better with words now, speaking more each day, though he still went quiet when emotions ran too high. She'd been working with him on his letters, using an old primer she'd found in the house. Sound it out, she encouraged as he struggled with a particularly long word. Beautiful, Eli said slowly. Beautiful. Good. What does it mean? Eli thought for a moment. Mama, he said quietly. Mama was beautiful. Mara's throat tightened. Yes, she was. Do you remember her well? Some. She had yellow hair and she sang songs. He looked up at Mara with those serious dark eyes. Are you beautiful? The question caught her completely off guard. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't, so directly that it never occurred to her someone might think differently. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't think so. But that's okay. There are more important things than being beautiful. Like what? Like being brave, being kind, being someone people can count on. She smoothed his dark hair. Your mama was all those things too, not just beautiful. And you're going to be like her, strong and good and true. And like Papa, Eli added. Yes, like your papa too. Eli went back to his book, satisfied. But the question stayed with Mara long after she'd tucked him into bed. She stood in front of the small mirror in her room and looked at herself honestly for the first time in months. She'd changed. The soft roundness was still there. She'd never be delicate, but there was something different in her face. Something harder, more certain. The woman looking back at her had survived a Wyoming winter, had earned the respect of rough men, had become a mother to a broken child and a partner to a damaged man. Maybe that was beautiful. Or maybe it didn't matter either way. She was still staring at her reflection when Dane knocked on her door frame. She turned to find him standing there, uncertain. Can I come in? Of course. He entered her small room, too big for the space, making everything feel smaller. I wanted to thank you. For today. For the bank. For stopping me from doing something stupid with Crow. For all of it. You don't need to thank me. We're partners. Are we? He moved closer. Because sometimes I feel like you're carrying me instead of the other way around. Then maybe we take turns carrying each other. Mara reached for his hand. That's what partners do. He pulled her closer, his arms coming around her carefully, like he was still learning how to hold someone without breaking them. Mara leaned into his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Scared of losing this place. Scared of failing Eli. Scared of not being enough for you. Dane. Let me finish. He pulled back to look at her. You came here expecting nothing, asking for nothing. Just a place to be useful. But you've become everything. The ranch runs better, Eli's talking again. The men actually respect someone, and I... He stopped, struggling with words. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And that scares me most of all because I can't lose you the way I lost Sarah. I couldn't survive it. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Because I'm not Sarah, and I'm not leaving, and I'm not dying on you. I'm too stubborn for any of that. She grabbed the front of his shirt. And I love you too, you impossible, difficult, wonderful man. So we're stuck with each other. He kissed her then, and it was different from the other kisses they'd shared. Deeper, more honest. Full of promises neither of them knew if they could keep, but were going to try anyway. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dane rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he said. Not for... just stay. I don't want to be alone. All right. They lay down together on her narrow bed, fully clothed, just holding each other in the darkness. And for a few hours, while Wyoming slept around them and danger gathered at their borders, they were simply two people who'd found each other against all odds and were trying to hold on. The fire came 3 weeks later. Mara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of men shouting. She bolted upright, confused and disoriented, as Dane crashed through her door. "Barn's on fire," he said, his face illuminated by orange light from outside. "Get Eli and stay in the house." He was gone before she could respond, running toward the flames that were already consuming the barn and reaching for the sky like angry hands. Mara ran to Eli's room and found him standing at the window, staring at the fire with wide, terrified eyes. "Eli, come here." She pulled him away from the window and wrapped him in a blanket. "Stay with me. Don't go outside no matter what you hear, understand?" He nodded, trembling. Outside, chaos reigned. The men were hauling water from the well, forming a bucket line that looked pathetically inadequate against the roaring flames. Dane was trying to get the horses out of the barn, his figure visible as a dark silhouette against the orange inferno. Mara held Eli tight and watched their world burn. The barn, all their equipment, winter feed they couldn't afford to replace. Everything was going up in smoke. And she knew, with sick certainty, exactly who was responsible. By dawn, the fire had burned itself out, leaving a smoking ruin where the barn had stood. The men stood around it, exhausted and covered in soot, staring at the destruction with numb faces. They'd saved the horses, and that was all. Everything else was gone. Dane stood apart from the others, looking at the wreckage with an expression that broke Mara's heart. Defeat. Pure, absolute defeat. She walked to him slowly, Eli's hand tight in hers. "We're finished," Dane said flatly. "Without that barn, without the equipment, without winter feed, we can't run cattle through another season. Crow wins." "No," Mara said. "He doesn't. Look around, Mara. Look at what's left. We've got nothing. We've got each other. We've got the land. We've got a reason to fight." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "And we've got me. Crow made a mistake tonight." "What mistake?" "He underestimated us. Again." Fire was reflected in her eyes, not from the barn, but from somewhere inside. "He thinks he's won. Thinks we'll fold now. But I'm not folding. Are you? Dane looked at her for a long moment, at her soot-stained dress and her fierce expression and the way she stood like she was ready to fight the whole world. Something shifted in his face. "No," he said. "I'm not folding." "Good." Mara looked at the smoking ruins of the barn, then back at her husband. "Because Silas Crow just declared war, and he has no idea who he's fighting." The morning after the fire, Mara stood in the ruins of the barn and made an inventory of what remained. Not much. Charred beams, twisted metal that had once been tools, and ash. Endless ash that the wind scattered across the ranch like dirty snow. Dutch approached carefully, his weathered face gray with exhaustion. "Boss wants to know what you need from town." "Everything," Mara said flatly. "But what we can afford is different. Tell Dane I need 2 hours with the ledgers before anyone goes anywhere." "Yes, ma'am." Dutch hesitated. "Mrs. Mercer, I've been ranching 40 years, seen men lose everything more times than I can count. Most of them give up after something like this. But you're not most people, are you?" "I can't afford to be." She found Dane in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, his face drawn and his shoulders slumped in a way she'd never seen before. "The men are asking what to do," he said without looking up. "I don't have an answer for them." Mara sat down across from him. "Then it's a good thing I do. First, we need lumber for a temporary shelter for the equipment we don't have yet. Second, we need to buy feed to replace what burned, but only enough to get through until we can negotiate better prices. Third, we need to send someone to Rock Springs to file an official report about the fire with the territorial marshal." Dane finally looked at her. "The marshal? Mara, we can't prove Crow did this. Not yet, but we're going to." She pulled out the notebook where she'd been documenting every incident. "We've got 3 months of suspicious activity. Fences cut, cattle missing, equipment broken, and now a convenient fire that destroys everything we need to run this ranch. Pattern evidence. It might not be enough to arrest him, but it's enough to start an official investigation." Investigations take time. Time we don't have. Which is why we're also going to outmaneuver him financially. Mara spread the ledgers across the table. I've been going through the books. Crow's playing a long game, squeeze us slowly until we're desperate enough to sell cheap. But he's made assumptions about us. About me specifically. What kind of assumptions? That I'm just a ranch wife who doesn't understand business. That I'll panic and convince you to take his offer. Mara's smile was sharp. He has no idea I've been managing accounts since I was 12, or that I'm very, very good at finding money where there shouldn't be any. She showed him what she'd found. Tax credits they'd never claimed going back 3 years. Subsidies for land improvement they were entitled to. Errors in the bank's interest calculations that had cost them hundreds of dollars. And a loophole in the territorial water rights law that might, just might, give them leverage. If we file this claim, she said, tapping the water rights document, we can legally restrict Crow's downstream usage during drought conditions. It won't stop him, but it'll hurt him. Make taking Windscar Ridge more expensive than it's worth. Dane studied the papers, something like hope flickering in his eyes. You found all this in one night? I couldn't sleep. Might as well be useful. She reached across the table and took his hand. Dane, I need you to trust me on this. Let me handle the financial fight while you handle the ranch. We divide and conquer. You want to go up against Crow alone? I want to go up against him smart. And right now, the smartest thing we can do is hit him where he doesn't expect it, in his wallet and his water supply. Dane was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. All right. We do it your way. But if he comes after you, he won't. Men like Crow don't see women as threats. That's his weakness. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't realize it until later. The next 3 weeks were a blur of organized chaos. Mara made 4 trips to Sweetwater and 2 to Rock Springs, filing claims and paperwork, and making herself a nuisance at every territorial office she could find. She met with the marshal, a gray-haired man named Porter, who listened to her evidence with a skeptical expression that gradually shifted to interest. You've documented all this yourself? Porter asked, flipping through her notebook. Every incident, dates, times, witnesses when available. And you believe Silas Crow is responsible? I know he is, but proving it is your job, not mine. I'm just providing the information. Mara leaned forward. Marshal Porter, I understand that Crow has influence in Sweetwater County, but you answer to the territorial governor, not the local sheriff. And the governor has been making noise about land consolidation and intimidation tactics hurting homesteaders. This would be an excellent case to make an example of. Porter's eyes narrowed. You're well informed for a ranch wife. I read newspapers, and I pay attention. Mara stood. I'm not asking you to arrest Crow tomorrow. I'm asking you to investigate. Talk to other ranchers he squeezed out. Look at the pattern. Because if you don't, I'll take this information to every newspaper between here and Washington until someone listens. It was a bold threat from a woman with no real power, but Porter seemed impressed rather than offended. I'll look into it, he said. But Mrs. Mercer, be careful. Crow's a dangerous man when cornered. So am I. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Dane and the men were rebuilding. Not the barn. They didn't have money for that yet, but a crude shelter that would protect equipment and provide some storage. It was rough work with limited materials, but it was something. Progress. Proof they weren't beaten. Eli helped where he could, hauling small pieces of lumber and handing tools to the men. He was talking more now, full sentences sometimes, though he still went quiet when things got overwhelming. Mara watched him work alongside his father and saw the bond between them strengthening, built on shared labor and shared purpose. One evening, she found Dane teaching Eli how to hammer nails properly. The boy's face was scrunched in concentration as he tried to hit straight. Like this? Eli asked. Little more angle. There, good. Dane guided his small hand. You're getting it. When I'm big, I'll build Mama a house, Eli said suddenly. The one I drew, with windows that look like eyes. Dane's hand stilled. Yeah, son, when you're big. And Mara can live there too, because she's family now. Mara felt her throat tighten. Dane looked over at her, standing in the doorway, and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, love, complicated and hard-won. Yeah, Dane said softly, she's family. But family didn't protect them from what came next. Mara was in town alone, picking up supplies Martha had set aside for them, when Silas Crow walked into the general store. She saw him immediately. He was hard to miss, taking up space like he owned it. When his eyes landed on her, his expression shifted into something that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Mercer," he said pleasantly. "Fancy meeting you here." "Mr. Crow?" Mara kept her voice neutral. "If you'll excuse me, I was just finishing. I hear you've been busy. Meetings with territorial officials, filing claims, stirring up trouble." He moved closer, blocking her path to the door. "That's not very neighborly of you." Martha appeared from the back room, her face tight with worry. "Mara, I've got that flower you wanted." "She'll wait," Crow said without looking at Martha. "Mrs. Mercer and I are having a conversation." "We're not," Mara said firmly, "and I need to get back to the ranch." "In a minute." Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wanted to express my condolences about your barn. Terrible accident. Could have been much worse. Could have been the house." The threat was barely veiled. Mara felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. "Are you threatening my family, Mr. Crow?" "I'm simply pointing out that accidents happen on ranches. Fires, injuries, livestock getting spooked, and trampling someone." He leaned in closer. "You're out of your depth, Mrs. Mercer, playing at business you don't understand. A woman should know her place." "My place is standing right here, in your way," Mara said quietly. "And I'm not moving." For a moment, something dangerous flashed in Crow's eyes. Then he stepped back, his false pleasant demeanor sliding back into place. "Your husband should control his wife better, for her own safety." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Mrs. Mercer. Do give Dane my regards." He left, and Mara realized her hands were shaking. Martha hurried over, gripping her arm. "You shouldn't have provoked him. Crow doesn't make idle threats." "I know." Mara forced her hands to steady. "That's why I'm not backing down. Men like him only understand strength. Show fear and he'll crush you. Or he'll crush you anyway for being brave." Martha's expression was worried. "Mara, I'm saying this as a friend. Maybe you should consider Dane's safety, Eli's safety. Is this ranch worth dying for?" "It's not about the ranch anymore," Mara said. "It's about proving that bullies don't always win. That people like me, people like Dane and Eli, and everyone else Crow has squeezed and threatened, that we matter. We have value beyond what we're worth to men like him." She loaded her supplies and rode back to Windscar Ridge with her spine straight and her resolve hardened. But she didn't tell Dane about the encounter. Not yet. He had enough to worry about. 2 days later, someone took a shot at Dutch while he was checking the north fence line. The bullet missed by inches, splintering the fence post next to his head. Dutch hit the ground and scrambled for cover, but whoever fired didn't shoot again. By the time he made it back to the ranch to report, whoever had been out there was long gone. Dane was quiet in a way that scared Mara more than if he'd been shouting. He checked Dutch over carefully, making sure he was all right, then gathered all the men. "From now on, nobody rides alone," he said. "Nobody goes anywhere without being armed. We're under attack, and it's time we acknowledged it." "Boss," Tom said carefully, "maybe we should think about Crow's offer before someone gets killed." "No." The word came from Mara. Everyone turned to look at her. "We don't negotiate with terrorists. That's what he is. A terrorist using fear to get what he wants. We give in now. We're telling him that intimidation works, that violence wins." "Easy to say when you're not the one getting shot at," Pete muttered. "You think I'm safe?" Mara's voice was sharp. "Crow threatened me 2 days ago in the general store, told me accidents could happen, that I should know my place. You think he'll stop with Dutch? He's coming for all of us until we break or until we're dead. The only question is whether we're going to fight back." The men exchanged glances. Finally, Dutch spoke up. "I'm staying. Bastard took a shot at me. I want to see his face when he realizes he missed." One by one, the others agreed. They were angry now, past the point of fear, and into something more dangerous. The kind of anger that made men do stupid things or brave things, depending on how you channeled it. Dane pulled Mara aside after the meeting. "You should have told me Crow threatened you. You had enough to worry about. You're my wife. If someone threatens you, that's not something to worry about. That's everything." He gripped her shoulders. "Promise me you won't go to town alone anymore. Promise me." "I promise." She could see the fear in his eyes, raw and real. "Dane, I'm not being reckless. I'm being strategic. But I won't take unnecessary risks." "All of this is unnecessary risk. We could leave, start over somewhere Crow can't reach us. And go where? Do what? Dane, this ranch is who you are. Running won't change that. It'll just make you a man who ran instead of a man who fought. I'd rather be a man who ran than a widower again, he said roughly. The words hit her like a physical blow. She saw the truth in his face, the terror that he was going to lose her the way he'd lost Sarah, that his fear of that loss was almost stronger than his will to fight. Listen to me, Mara said, framing his face with her hands. I'm not Sarah. I'm not fragile. I'm not weak, and I'm not dying on you. Sarah got sick. That was terrible and unfair and not anyone's fault. But this is different. This is a fight we can win if we're smart and careful and together. Do you understand? Together. Not you protecting me. Not me making decisions alone. Together. Dane closed his eyes, his jaw tight. I'm so tired of being afraid. Then let's turn that fear into something useful. Let's make Crow afraid of us for once. She didn't know how prophetic those words would be. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carlos had been quietly investigating the fire, poking around in ways no one had asked him to. He showed up at the house one evening with something wrapped in cloth. Found this near where the barn was, he said, unwrapping it carefully. Thought you should see. It was a piece of metal, blackened by fire, but still recognizable as part of a lantern. Not just any lantern. A distinctive style with a maker's mark that Carlos had traced to a supplier in Rock Springs. A supplier who kept records of who bought what. This type of lantern wasn't sold in Sweetwater, Carlos explained. Only Rock Springs, and only 2 commercial operations. I rode over there yesterday, asked some questions. The last person to buy this model was Silas Crow. 6 of them, 3 weeks before our barn burned. Mara stared at the metal piece like it was made of gold. This is proof. Not conclusive, but enough to build on. Carlos, you're brilliant. He shrugged, but looked pleased. Figured if we're fighting, might as well fight with facts. Mara rode to Rock Springs the next morning with Carlos as escort, both of them armed. She found Marshal Porter in his office and laid the evidence on his desk. The lantern piece, Carlos's statement, purchase records from the supplier. Porter examined everything carefully. This is good work, Mrs. Mercer. Circumstantial, but compelling. Combined with the pattern you've already documented, he leaned back in his chair. I think I have enough to bring Crow in for questioning at least. When? Soon. But Mrs. Mercer, you need to understand something. Crow's got lawyers, money, and influence. Even with this evidence, he might walk. Justice isn't always just. I know. But at least we tried. At least we made it expensive for him. At least we showed him that some people fight back. Mara stood. Do what you can, Marshal. That's all I'm asking. She and Carlos rode back to Windscar Ridge, with cautious hope settling between them. Maybe they were winning. Maybe they had a chance. They were 2 miles from home when riders appeared on the horizon. 5 of them, coming fast. Mara's stomach dropped. Ride, Carlos said sharply, spurring his horse. Ride hard and don't stop. They raced toward the ranch, the riders gaining behind them. Mara could hear shouting, the thunder of hooves. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the ranch buildings came into view. Dane was in the yard when they came galloping in, dust flying. He took one look at their faces, at the riders approaching, and started shouting orders. The men appeared from various directions, all armed, forming a defensive line in front of the house. The 5 riders pulled up short at the property boundary, clearly not expecting resistance. Mara recognized one of them, a hard-faced man she'd seen with Crow in town. He sat his horse with casual arrogance. We're here for Mrs. Mercer, he called out. Mr. Crow wants to talk to her about some accusations she's been making. She's not going anywhere with you, Dane said flatly. Not really your choice, Mercer. The lady's been spreading lies about Mr. Crow. He's got a right to face his accuser. Then he can come here and face me, Mara said, stepping forward despite Dane's attempt to hold her back. In front of witnesses. Or better yet, he can face Marshal Porter, who's very interested in talking to him about arson and intimidation. The hard-faced man's expression darkened. You're making a big mistake. The only mistake was Crow thinking I'd be too scared to fight back. Mara's voice carried across the space between them. Tell your boss that if he wants Windscar Ridge, he's going to have to take it legally. Because I've documented everything, every threat, every incident, every crime. It's all recorded, and it's all filed with the territorial marshal. If anything happens to me or my family, that information goes to every newspaper and government office in Wyoming. He'll be finished." The writers exchanged glances. Finally, the hard-faced man spat in the dirt. "You're in over your head, lady." "Maybe, but I'm still swimming." They rowed off, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. The men stayed on high alert for the rest of the day, weapons close and nerves tight. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She kept running through scenarios trying to anticipate Crow's next move. He was backed into a corner now, which made him either more dangerous or more desperate. Possibly both. She found Dane standing at the window, staring out at the dark prairie. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. "Keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong." Mara moved to stand beside him. "Me too, but also thinking about the ways it could go right. Porter's investigating. We've got evidence. Crow's losing his advantage. Or we've just made him angry enough to do something reckless." Dane turned to look at her. "Mara, if anything happens, if things go bad, I need you to take Eli and run. Promise me." "I'm not promising that." Mara, no. She grabbed his arm. "We're not doing this. We're not planning for failure. We're planning for victory, and victory means we all survive this together. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met." "Good thing you married me then." He pulled her close, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heartbeat, fast and hard. "I love you," he said into her hair, "even when you're being terrifying." "Especially when I'm being terrifying," she corrected. "That's when I'm most useful." He laughed despite himself, and the sound eased some of the tension in the room. They went to bed together that night, not in Mara's small room, but in Dane's. They lay tangled together in the darkness, holding each other like they were the only solid things in a shifting world. "Tell me we're going to win," Dane whispered. "We're going to win," Mara said, "because we have to, because there's no other option, because I didn't come 3,000 miles and survive a Wyoming winter just to lose to some bully with more money than sense." "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy, it's necessary. Big difference." Morning came too soon. Mara woke to find Dane already gone, his side of the bed cold. She dressed quickly and went to find him. He was in the yard with Dutch and Tom, examining something on the ground. When Mara got closer, she saw what it was: a dead calf, throat cut, left right in the middle of their property, like a message. "Found it this morning," Dutch said grimly. "Someone got past our patrols last night." Mara looked at the small body, at the blood staining the dirt, and felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was escalation. Crow was showing them he could reach them anywhere, anytime. "Bury it," she said quietly, "and double the watches tonight. He's testing us, seeing if we'll break." "Will we?" Tom asked, his young face pale. Mara met his eyes. "No, we won't, because that's exactly what he wants, and I'm done giving Silas Crow what he wants." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Every man here was in danger because of her decisions. Eli was in danger. Dane was in danger. How much could she ask them to risk? How much could she risk herself? She didn't have answers. She just had determination and a bone-deep stubbornness that refused to yield. That afternoon, a rider came from town. Not one of Crow's men, but a young boy from the telegraph office. He handed Mara a telegram with shaking hands, clearly terrified to be here. Mara opened it and read the words 3 times before they made sense. "Marshal Porter shot, stop, wounded but alive. Stop, investigation suspended. Stop. Crow has alibi. Stop. Be careful. Stop." Her hands went numb. The telegram fluttered to the ground. "Mara?" Dane's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What is it?" She couldn't speak. Could only stand there while the world tilted around her and the truth sank in like a stone. Porter had been shot. The investigation was over. Crow had won. Or had he? Because Porter wasn't dead. The investigation was suspended, not canceled, and an attempted murder of a territorial marshal was exactly the kind of overreach that could bring in federal authorities. Mara picked up the telegram with steady hands. "Get everyone together," she said to Dane. "All the men. We need to talk." "About what?" "About ending this, one way or another." That evening, gathered in the house with everyone crowded into the main room, Mara laid out the situation. Porter shot. Investigation compromised. Crow feeling invincible. So what do we do? Jesse asked. We make him come to us, Mara said. On our terms, where we control the situation. How? Frank demanded. By giving him exactly what he thinks he wants. Mara looked at Dane. You're going to send word that you're ready to sell, that the fight's taken too much out of us and we're accepting his offer. He'll come here to finalize the deal, to gloat, to mark his victory. And then what? Carlos asked. And then we get him to confess, Mara said. We record it, document it, get proof we can use that doesn't depend on Potter or the local sheriff or anyone else who might be compromised. Dane was staring at her. You want to trap him? I want to end him, legally, properly, so he can never come after us or anyone else again. Mara's voice was hard. But we only get one shot at this. If we fail, he'll destroy us. So we can't fail. The room was silent as everyone absorbed the plan. Finally, Dutch spoke up. I'm in. Bastards had this coming for a long time. One by one, the others agreed. Even Dane, though she could see the fear in his eyes. Fear for her, for all of them, but also trust. He was trusting her judgment, her plan, her ability to see this through. All right, Dane said. We do it your way. But Mara, if this goes wrong, it won't, she interrupted, because I'm done underestimating myself, and it's time Crow stopped underestimating me too. They sent the message that night and waited for Silas Crow to take the bait. Crow took 3 days to respond. 3 days of waiting that stretched everyone's nerves to breaking. Mara kept herself busy with preparation, going over every detail of the plan until she could recite it in her sleep. The men rehearsed their positions. Dane checked and rechecked the recording device they'd borrowed from a journalist in Rock Springs. A new Edison phonograph cylinder that could capture voices if you got close enough and kept quiet enough. It felt like holding your breath underwater, waiting to see if you'd surface or drown. The reply came via the same telegraph boy, who looked even more nervous this time. The message was brief and triumphant in its brevity. Will arrive Thursday noon to finalize terms. Stop, come alone. Stop, Crow. Alone, Dutch muttered when Mara read it aloud. He's not even trying to hide what he is anymore.
He thinks he's won, Mara said. Men who think they've won get careless. That's what we're counting on.
Thursday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of Wyoming day that felt like the world was holding its breath. Mara dressed carefully in her best dress, the dark blue one she'd worn to town when she needed to look respectable. She braided her hair and pinned it up, then checked her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back at her was pale but steady, scared but determined. She found Eli in his room, sitting on his bed with the wooden horse his mother had carved. He looked up when she entered, his dark eyes too knowing for a 7-year-old. You're fighting the bad man today, he said. Not a question. Yes. Papa's scared. I know. Mara sat beside him. I'm scared too. But you're doing it anyway. Sometimes the right thing is scary. Doesn't mean we don't do it. She pulled him close. Eli, I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens today, you stay with Carlos in the back bedroom. Don't come out until your father or I come get you. Understand? What if you don't come? The question hit her hard. She swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. Then Carlos will take care of you. And you'll remember that your father and I loved you more than anything. That we fought because you deserve a world where bullies don't always win. Eli wrapped his small arms around her neck, holding tight. I love you, Mara. It was the first time he'd said it. Mara closed her eyes and held him like she could protect him from everything that was coming just by holding on hard enough. I love you too, sweetheart, so much. She found Dane in the kitchen, staring at the phonograph like it might explode. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up, and the raw fear in his eyes nearly undid her resolve. This is insane, he said flatly. We're betting everything on a machine that might not even work, and a man who's already proven he's willing to kill to get what he wants. Yes, Mara agreed, but what's the alternative? Roll over and let him win? Run away and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? Dane, this ends today, one way or another. I can't lose you, his voice cracked. Mara, I can't. She crossed to him and grabbed his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. You're not going to lose me, but I need you to be strong today, for Eli, for the men, for both of us. Can you do that? He closed his eyes, breathing hard. When he opened them again, something had shifted. The fear was still there, but behind it was steel. Yeah, I can do that. Good. She kissed him, trying to pour everything she felt into it. Love and hope and determination and terror, all mixed together. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. We're going to win. You keep saying that. Because I keep believing it. At 11:30, they took their positions. The phonograph was hidden behind a stack of ledgers on the kitchen table, its horn covered with a cloth to muffle the mechanical noise. Dane would be in the room, playing the defeated rancher ready to surrender. The men were hidden throughout the house. Dutch and Tom in the parlor, Pete and Jesse upstairs, Frank near the back door. Carlos was with Eli, armed and ready to run if things went completely wrong. Mara positioned herself in the kitchen, close enough to hear everything, close enough to intervene if needed. She had a rifle propped against the wall behind her, hidden but accessible. Her hands shook as she checked it one more time. He's coming, Tom called softly from his position by the window. Mara's heart kicked into a gallop. She took a slow breath, then another, forcing her hands to steady. This was it. Everything came down to the next hour. Silas Crow arrived exactly at noon with 3 of his men, riding up to the house like he owned it already. Mara watched through the window as he dismounted, straightening his expensive coat and adjusting his hat. He looked pleased with himself, almost jovial. A man about to claim his prize. Dane met him at the door, his face carefully neutral. Crow. Mercer. Good to see you've come to your senses. Crow gestured to his men. Wait here. This won't take long. He followed Dane into the house, his eyes cataloging everything with undisguised satisfaction. When he saw the kitchen, saw Mara standing there, his expression flickered with surprise and then annoyance. I said come alone, Mercer. She's my wife, Dane said flatly. She has a right to be here for this. Crow's gaze moved over Mara with that same crawling assessment she'd felt in the general store. I suppose. Though I'd think a man would want to spare his woman the humiliation of admitting defeat. I'm not easily humiliated, Mara said evenly, and I insisted on being present. We're partners in this ranch. In everything. Something dark crossed Crow's face, but he waved it away. Fine. Let's get this over with. He pulled papers from his coat and spread them on the kitchen table, right next to where the phonograph was hidden. Standard land transfer, $40,000, as agreed. Sign here and here, and you can be gone by week's end. Dane stared at the papers. Mara could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his hands had curled into fists. He was acting, playing his part, but the emotion underneath was real. This was his home, his legacy. Signing those papers, even as a ruse, was killing him. Before we sign, Mara said carefully, I'd like to understand something. Why do you want Windscar Ridge so badly? It's not the best land. The cattle operation is modest. What makes it worth all this effort? Crow smiled, the expression oily and self-satisfied. I told you, water rights, control Sweetwater Creek, control the region. But you already have water access downstream. Why do you need ours? Because I want it. Crow's smile hardened. Because I'm building an empire out here, Mrs. Mercer, and empires don't leave loose ends. Your little ranch sits right in the middle of my territory like a splinter. I remove splinters. By burning barns? The words came out before Mara could stop them. By shooting at men? By threatening families? The room went very still. Crow's expression shifted from satisfaction to something dangerous. Careful, Mrs. Mercer. That sounds like an accusation. It's an observation. Mara kept her voice steady, even as her heart hammered. We've had a string of very unfortunate accidents since you made your first offer. Fences cut, cattle missing, equipment destroyed, and then our barn mysteriously caught fire in the middle of the night. Accidents happen on ranches. Crow's voice had gone cold. You should be careful about suggesting otherwise. Slander is a serious charge. So is arson, Dane said quietly. An attempted murder. Marshal Porter sends his regards, by the way. He's recovering nicely. Crow's face flushed red. You think you're clever? Think you can trap me with your pathetic little schemes? Porter was a warning, same as the barn, same as everything else. I gave you chances to do this the easy way. You chose hard. So you admit it, Mara said. You've been sabotaging us. I admit nothing. But Crow was angry now, past the point of caution. But if I had been, what of it? This is Wyoming, not Boston. Out here, the strong survive and the weak get swallowed. You two are weak. Your ranch is weak. That boy upstairs is weak. You're all just taking up space that belongs to men with vision. Men like you, Dane said flatly. Exactly like me. Crow stabbed a finger at the papers. Now sign these damn documents or the next fire won't be a barn. It'll be this house, with everyone in it. You're threatening to murder my family, Dane said, his voice deadly quiet. I'm explaining reality. Crow leaned back, his confidence returning. You can sell to me today and walk away with money and your lives. Or you can refuse and in 6 months you'll be dead or broken and I'll buy this place at auction for pennies. Your choice. Mara felt ice in her veins, but also clarity. This was it. The confession they needed. Why? She asked softly. Why do you need to destroy people to get what you want? You're rich, powerful. You could buy land anywhere. Why take it from people who have nothing? Crow looked at her like she was stupid. Because I can. Because power isn't about what you have. It's about what you can take from others. Every ranch I absorb, every family I squeeze out, it proves I'm the strongest, that I deserve to win. That's not strength, Mara said. That's just cruelty with a better name. Call it what you want. Crow stood, pushing the papers toward Dane. Last chance, Mercer. Sign or suffer. Dane looked at Mara. She gave the smallest nod. He looked back at Crow. No, Dane said. We're not signing, and you're not leaving until the territorial marshal gets here. Crow's laugh was harsh. The marshal? You think Porter's going to help you? He's laid up in a hospital bed, and even if he wasn't, you've got no proof of anything. Actually, Mara said, reaching for the cloth covering the phonograph, we have quite a bit of proof, including a recording of you admitting to arson, intimidation, attempted murder, and threatening to burn down our house with our family inside. She pulled away the cloth, revealing the phonograph. Crow's face went white, then purple with rage. You bitch, he snarled. You think that's admissible? You think anyone will believe? Multiple witnesses, Dutch said, stepping into the kitchen with his rifle. We heard everything, and will testify to it. The other men appeared from their hiding places surrounding Crow. He looked at them, at the phonograph, at Dane and Mara standing together, and something shifted in his expression, from rage to calculation. This doesn't change anything, he said coldly. I own the sheriff. I own half the county. That recording will disappear, and so will all of you if you don't. The front door burst open. A man in a marshal's uniform strode in, flanked by 2 deputies. But it wasn't Marshal Porter. This man was younger, harder, with federal badges glinting on his chest. Silas Crow, the marshal said. I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal William Hayes. You're under arrest for arson, extortion, intimidation, attempted murder of a federal officer, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to... On whose authority? Crow demanded. You can't just... On the authority of the U.S. Attorney General's office. Hayes pulled out a document. We've been investigating land fraud and intimidation in this territory for 6 months. Marshal Porter's shooting accelerated our timeline. And when Mrs. Mercer sent us documentation of your activities, along with a sworn statement from a journalist willing to verify the recording device, we had everything we needed for arrest warrants. Mara felt her knees go weak. The journalist. The man who'd loaned them the phonograph had been working with federal marshals. She hadn't known, hadn't even suspected. Crow's face contorted with fury as the deputies moved to restrain him. This isn't over. I have lawyers. I have friends in Washington. You think you've won, but... We don't think we've won, Mara interrupted. We know we have. Because you underestimated us from the beginning. Thought a defeated rancher and his fat wife couldn't possibly outsmart you. That was your mistake. Crow lunged at her, but the deputies had him. They hauled him toward the door, still shouting threats and curses. His men outside scattered when they saw federal badges, unwilling to go down with their boss. Marshal Hayes stayed behind, his expression neutral but not unkind. Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Mercer, you took significant risks with this plan. If things had gone differently... But they didn't, Mara said quietly. They went right. For once, they went right. Hayes nodded slowly. You'll need to come to Rock Springs to make formal statements, and we'll need that recording as evidence. But I want you to know, what you did here today might help us take down Crow's entire operation. Other ranchers he's victimized will come forward now. You've given people hope that the law still means something out here. After Hayes and his deputies left with Crow in custody, the house fell into stunned silence. The men stood around looking at each other like they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Finally, Dutch started laughing, a great booming sound that was half relief and half disbelief. "We did it," he said. "By all that's holy, we actually did it." The others joined in, whooping and slapping each other's backs. The tension that had been building for months finally released, leaving everyone giddy and exhausted. Mara found herself pulled into a fierce hug by Tom, then Frank, then all of them taking turns congratulating her and Dane and each other. It felt like celebration and wake at the same time, joy for surviving mixed with grief for what it had cost to get here. Carlos emerged from the back bedroom with Eli, who ran straight to his father. Dane scooped him up, holding him tight enough to make the boy squeak in protest. "Is it over?" Eli asked, his voice muffled against Dane's shoulder. "Is the bad man gone?" "Yeah, son." Dane's voice was rough. "He's gone. We're safe now." "Because of Mara." Eli pulled back to look at her. "She saved us." "We saved each other," Mara corrected gently. "That's what families do." That night, after the men had celebrated with whiskey Dutch had been saving for a special occasion, after Eli had been put to bed with extra reassurances, after the house had finally gone quiet, Mara and Dane stood on the porch looking out at their land. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Dane admitted, "for this to turn out to be a dream. It's real." Mara leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "We won. Crow's going to prison. The ranch is safe." "You knew," Dane said suddenly, "about the federal investigation. You contacted them before all this." "I sent them everything I'd documented weeks ago," Mara admitted, "but I didn't know if they'd respond or when. Today was pure luck. They happened to be ready to move when we set our trap. They hadn't shown up." "Don't." Dane turned her to face him. "Don't think about what could have gone wrong. Think about what went right. You stood up to a man who terrified everyone else. You documented his crimes. You built a case. You planned a trap that worked. And you did it all while keeping this ranch running and taking care of Eli and putting up with me." "Putting up with you is the easy part," Mara said. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they broke apart they were both breathing hard. "Marry me," Dane said. Mara blinked. "We're already married." "Marry me again, for real this time. Not because it's practical or necessary, but because I love you and I want everyone to know it. Because I want to stand up in that church and promise you everything, not just survival, but happiness. A real marriage, Mara. The kind you deserve." She felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You're sure? Because I'm still going to be fat and stubborn and difficult. You're beautiful and brilliant and impossible. And I wouldn't change a single thing about you." He cupped her face in his rough hands. "Marry me. Say yes." "Yes," Mara whispered. "Yes, you ridiculous man. Yes." They held each other on that porch while Wyoming stretched dark and quiet around them, and for the first time since Mara had arrived at Windscar Ridge, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The trial happened in September. Crow's lawyers tried every trick they knew, but between the phonograph recording, the testimony of multiple witnesses, the physical evidence Carlos had found, and statements from 3 other ranchers who finally felt safe enough to come forward, the case was airtight. Silas Crow was convicted of arson, extortion, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder of a federal officer. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mara sat in the courtroom and watched him being led away in chains. She felt no joy in it, just a quiet satisfaction that justice had been done, that bullies didn't always win, that standing up mattered. On the courthouse steps afterward, a woman approached her, middle-aged, worn thin by hard years, but with steel in her eyes. "You're Mara Mercer," the woman said. "Yes. I'm Helen Pritchard. Crow squeezed my husband and me off our land 3 years ago. We lost everything. I just wanted to say thank you for fighting when we couldn't, for proving it was possible." Other people approached with similar stories, families destroyed, lives ruined, all by one man's greed and the system that protected him until someone finally said enough. Mara listened to them all, shook their hands, accepted their gratitude. But inside, she was thinking about how close they'd come to losing, how easily it could have gone the other way. How much had depended on luck and timing and federal marshals showing up at exactly the right moment. The system was broken. It had taken a near miracle to get justice. That wasn't right, and it wasn't enough. On the ride back to Windscar Ridge, she told Dane what she was thinking. "I want to run for county commissioner," she said. He nearly drove the wagon off the road. "What?" "Someone needs to fix the local government. Make sure another crow can't buy his way into power. It should be someone who knows what it's like to be powerless. Someone who understands what's at stake." "Mara, you know they'll never elect a woman." "Maybe not, but maybe they will. We just proved that impossible things can happen." She looked at him. "You think I'm crazy?" "I think you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met." Dane reached for her hand. "And I think if anyone can break that barrier, it's you. So yes, run for commissioner, change the system, terrify all the right people." She laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie. "You know this means more trouble, right? More fights, more people underestimating me. I'm getting used to it." The second wedding happened in October, when the leaves on the cottonwoods had turned gold and the air carried the first hint of winter. The church was packed, the ranch hands, neighbors from miles around, people from town who'd heard about the woman who took down Silas Crow and wanted to see her for themselves. Martha Webb had helped Mara make a new dress, pale blue with delicate embroidery. It was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with hiding her body or making her smaller. It was beautiful because it was honest. Eli stood next to Dane as his father's best man, serious in his new suit. Dutch gave Mara away, his weathered face proud. The preacher spoke about love and partnership and choosing each other every day, not just once. When Dane kissed her at the altar, the whole church erupted in applause. Mara kissed him back, not caring who was watching, not caring what anyone thought. She was done apologizing for taking up space in the world. At the reception in the church hall, people kept coming up to congratulate them. Some of the women pulled Mara aside with quiet questions. How had she learned to keep accounts? How did she manage the men? Would she really run for office? Could women do that? Mara answered every question honestly. She told them about the years of feeling invisible, about learning to make herself useful because that was the only way she'd been taught to matter, but also about discovering that useful and powerful weren't the same thing, that you could be both, that you didn't need permission to fight for yourself. "You make it sound easy," one young woman said wistfully. "It's not easy," Mara said. "It's terrifying, but so is living small when you were made for something bigger. At least fighting is honest." Later, watching Dane dance with Eli while the boy laughed, really laughed, high and bright and free, Mara felt Martha Webb come stand beside her. "You did it," Martha said softly. "Saved the ranch, saved your family, changed everything." "We're not finished," Mara said. "There's still so much work to do. The ranch is barely profitable. The commissioner race will be brutal, and winter's coming again." "Winter's always coming in Wyoming," Martha said with a smile. "But you'll survive it. You survive everything." Mara thought about that word. Survive. She'd spent her whole life just trying to survive. Her family's cruelty, society's judgment, her own doubts. But somewhere along the way, survival had transformed into something else. Living. Actually living instead of just existing. Dane found her after the dancing, pulling her outside into the cool October evening. Stars were already appearing in the huge Wyoming sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," Mara admitted. "Happy, hopeful, exhausted, all of it at once." "That's called living," Dane said, echoing her earlier thoughts. "Get used to it." They stood together under those impossible stars, and Mara thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train in Sweetwater 6 months ago, scared, alone, expecting nothing but a place to be useful. That woman felt like a stranger now. She thought about Eli's drawing of a house with windows like eyes and a door like a smile. Maybe they would build it someday. Not because they needed it, but because they wanted it. Because dreams mattered as much as survival. She thought about the women at the reception, asking quiet questions about power and possibility, about the ranchers who'd thanked her for fighting, about the way systems could change when enough people decided they were worth changing. Mostly, she thought about worth, about how she'd spent 26 years believing she had none because nobody wanted her, and how she'd discovered that worth wasn't about being wanted. It was about deciding you mattered and refusing to accept anything less. I love you, she told Dane, the words still feeling new and strange and wonderful in her mouth. I love you too, he said, even though you're about to make our lives extremely complicated with this commissioner campaign, especially because of that. He laughed and pulled her close, and they stood there under the Wyoming stars while their future stretched out ahead of them, uncertain, difficult, and entirely their own. Years later, when people asked Mara Mercer how she'd done it, how she'd saved Windscar Ridge, defeated Silas Crow, won a seat as the first female county commissioner in Wyoming, and helped pass reforms that protected small ranchers from exploitation, she always gave the same answer. I stopped waiting for permission to matter, she'd say. And I stopped believing people who told me I couldn't. After that, everything else was just work. But that was the public answer, the one for newspapers and speeches and young women who looked at her with hopeful eyes. The private answer, the one she gave to Eli when he asked years later, was different. I was angry, she told him honestly. They were sitting on the porch of the house they'd finally built, the one from his childhood drawing, with windows that looked like eyes. I was so angry at everyone who'd made me feel small, and I was tired of being angry without doing anything about it. So I channeled all that rage into something useful, into fighting, into refusing to lose. Was it worth it? Eli asked. He was 16 now, growing into the kind of man who would carry his parents' lessons into the future. All the fighting, all the risk. Mara thought about that question, about the fire and the fear and the moments when she'd thought they'd lose everything, about the nightmares she still had sometimes where Crow won, about the toll the commissioner work took on her, the constant battles, the way some people would never forgive her for being a woman with power. She thought about the ranch, thriving now, about Dane, sleeping peacefully in the bedroom they shared instead of lying awake paralyzed by grief, about Eli, whole and healed and able to build his own life without the weight of trauma crushing him. She thought about the women who came to her for advice, who ran for office themselves, who started businesses, who stopped apologizing for existing, about the ranchers who'd kept their land because of reforms she'd fought for, about the system that was slowly, painfully becoming more just. Yes, she said finally. It was worth it, not because we won, though we did, but because we tried. Because standing up matters even when you lose, maybe especially when you lose. It shows other people that resistance is possible, that you don't have to accept cruelty as inevitable. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're my hero, you know. You and Papa both, but especially you." Mara felt her throat tighten. Why especially me? Because Papa was born strong. He was raised on this land, taught to fight, given every advantage a man could have. He still almost broke when things got hard. Eli looked at her with those serious dark eyes that were so much like his father's. But you had none of that. Everyone told you that you were wrong, that you were too much, that you should disappear. And you decided they were wrong instead. You made yourself strong. That's harder. Maybe it was. Mara didn't know. She just knew that she'd stopped believing other people's definitions of her worth, and everything else had followed from that single decision. The sun was setting over Windscar Ridge, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Dane came out to join them on the porch, settling into his chair with a satisfied grunt. He was grayer now, lines deeper around his eyes, but still solid, still steady. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" he asked. "Heroes," Eli said, "and whether fighting is worth it." Dane looked at Mara, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What'd you tell him?" "That fighting is always worth it when you're fighting for the right to exist on your own terms." Good answer. Dane reached for her hand, his grip warm and familiar. "Though I'd add that it's easier when you're not fighting alone. Everything's easier with the right partner." Mara squeezed his hand, thinking about the woman who'd answered an advertisement for a wife in Wyoming. The woman nobody chose. The woman who'd been so desperate for dignity that she'd crossed a continent to marry a stranger. That woman had been looking for a place where she might finally matter. What she'd found was something more, the realization that she'd always mattered. She'd just needed to believe it herself. She'd needed to stop waiting for someone else to give her permission to be extraordinary. She'd needed to stand up and claim her own worth, regardless of what the world thought. And once she did that, when she truly believed she deserved to take up space, Everything else became possible. Not easy. Never easy. But possible. That was the lesson she'd carry forward. The one she'd teach to anyone who asked. The one that mattered most. You don't have to be beautiful to be valuable. You don't have to be chosen to choose yourself. You don't have to wait for permission to fight for your own life. You just have to decide you're worth fighting for. Everything else is just details. Mara Mercer sat on her porch watching the sun set over land she'd bled for, fought for, and won. Her husband beside her, her son grown strong, her legacy spreading roots deeper than any prairie grass. She'd started as the woman nobody chose. She'd become the woman no one could break. And that, she thought as stars began to appear in the endless Wyoming sky, was more than enough.